Hi there, Tom here from Apiary again. I've been asked to do a little video on the tools that I use to start my apiary. I've also been asked if I can give some suggestions on where you should and shouldn't place your hive around your property. Please be aware that this is all just my opinion, and if you do any research into beekeeping you'll know there are 50 opinions on everything. So take my opinion with a grain of salt, figure out what works for you and go from there. I'll also take you on a wee bit of a tour of my yard and show you some of the spots that I chose not to place my hives and do some explaining as to why I chose to place my hives where I did. Hope you enjoy this video. One of the first things you're probably going to want to get is a hive tool. This one here is my personal favourite. As you can see, it's got a hook at that end and a flat sort of chisel-like end at the other end. Now the chisel end is really good for opening your boxes, the hook at that other end is really good for lifting your frames out of your boxes, and this little curved bit here is very good at separating your frames within your box. A second type of hive tool is very similar to the first one. It's quite a lot longer and it just doesn't have the curved bit at the end, it's got two hooks instead. And the third type, which was my very first hive tool, is sort of the in-between of the two. It's got the chisel end, it's got the curved end, but it's got no hook. It's also got a really nice meaty handle which allows you to feel the hive tool in your hand. So these are three types of hive tools that you may want to invest in. You're obviously going to need a box, which are a pretty standard size, but when it comes to frames, you've got a couple of different options. You can go with a plastic frame or a wooden frame. The thing I like about plastic frames is they're very hardy when it comes to extracting honey. You can be a bit rougher with them. The downside for me is you have to wax them every year. With the plastic frames, they usually come with some foundation already in them, unless you want to embed your own, but I would recommend buying frames that are ready to go. One of the more important investments that you will make as a beekeeper is your smoker. Now the smoker, despite what people think, the smoke itself that comes out of the smoker doesn't affect the bees at all. What it does is it makes the bees think that there's a fire nearby, and in nature, when there's a fire, they need to store up on honey getting ready to leave. It is the storage of honey that makes the bees sort of go a little bit drunk, for want of a better word. It calms them down and it makes them easier to work with. One of the other essential things that I've found invaluable for me is a bee brush. Now the bee brush allows you to brush bees really nicely off the frame without having to use your hands. It helps you avoid getting stung because you're not handling the bees, and it's made of a really nice material that doesn't hurt the bees when you brush them off. Finally, don't forget a lighter. Without a lighter you're not going to be able to light your smoker, and therefore you're not going to be able to calm your bees down ready for honey extraction or ready for checking your hive or whatever you're doing with them. One thing that probably isn't essential, and it's not going to fit fully in my frame, but it's one thing I find invaluable with my hives, particularly getting into winter, is a top feeder. Now the beauty of a top feeder over a frame feeder or a bottle feeder is that you can check your feed all throughout winter without actually having to enter the hive. Therefore, you don't need to cool the hive down in order to check how much food they've got. Top feeders range from about 7.5 litres through to 10 litres in quantity, and they hold all your sugar syrup and allow the bees to access through these entrances here. There's one in each corner, and there's a big one in the middle that has a cover over it so that the bees can climb up in the middle but they don't drown in the syrup. I'm going to now talk about some of the do's and don'ts in terms of placement within your property for your hive. When considering where to place your hive on your property, it's important to consider a few things. The main one for me is, where are my neighbours? Now in urban Christchurch it's really hard to position your hive away from your neighbours. So the second consideration is, how can I encourage my bees to fly over my neighbour's property rather than through it? The best way to do that is to put your hive near a big hedge or fence that's at least 6 foot tall. This will encourage the bees to come out of the hive and fly straight up rather than flying directly across people's property. The other consideration is, do I have a water source? If not, you're going to need to create one. We're really lucky here at my property that we've got a park out the back with a few big ponds in it, and that is our water source for our bees. Third consideration is, how are my bees going to come into the hive and what obstacles do they have in their way? Now we've made our bees fly very high because we've got a big macrocarpa tree not far from our hive which forces them to fly up. But actually, a big learning I have is bees don't particularly care whether they've got the prettiest runway or not. They just need to be able to get in and out of their hive really easily. The fourth consideration, are there flowers around? Bees will fly up to 5 kilometres to find nectar and pollen, but you don't want them doing that every day because otherwise their life cycle will be even shorter than it already is. So before you get a hive, maybe consider planting a bee-friendly garden, or like us, if you're lucky, you may have a garden next to you in terms of a public park. Now the last thing that I considered when I placed my hive is, what is the views of other people going to be? One of the places which I'll show you in a minute where I wanted to put my hives was at the front of my property to avoid my dog. But a neighbour of mine had a really good point that if you're out there checking your hive in a bee suit and someone walks past, what are they going to think? Okay, people are really quick to be scared of bees because they don't understand them. So my hives are tucked away where very few people can see them. Not that I'm ashamed of them or I want to hide them, but it's the perception that people have of bees that was an issue for me. I'm going to now take you to a few of those spots I was talking about and hang out at the aviary again for a quick chat. One of the places I really considered putting my hive was up here. A big pro of putting it here is that it's at about my waist height, so I wouldn't have to bend over to check it. But a very big con, and the reason I didn't do it, is that as you can see my neighbour's property is right there. That's one of their main entertaining areas, and the last thing they would want, and I would want if it was my house, is bees flying through my entertainment area. The next place I considered putting my hive was here. Again, it's at a very nice working height for me. I'm not going to hurt my back checking the hives all the time. It's going to get a bit of shelter from the wind, from the trees around it, but the biggest con for me here was it was right next to the washing line. Now you do not want bees flying over your washing line. And the main reason for that is, what do they do when they leave the hive and come into it? They go to the bathroom, and bee poo is very hard to get off your clothes. Now the last place that I considered putting my hive was here. This is at the front of my property, so it wouldn't be an issue for my dog. It also gets really good shelter from the wind because we've got this great hedge here and we've got a fence behind it and we've got a big tree next to it. But the biggest issue with that is that that's the street and the footpath right there, and people walking past I don't think would be too happy with the thousands of bees that fly out of your hive every day. So I settled for here. Now we've all had a tour of the apiary, and the reason I settled for here is we've got a nice big fence next to us here. The macrocarpa tree there encourages the bees to fly up, and it's right next to our glass house, which at the moment is full of mint. Mint helps treat varroa on a very small scale, and also it's just nice, and the bees love it. So it really helps pollinate our glass house, as well as we don't have the issue of bees flying directly through our neighbour's property. The other reason is that just over that fence is the back of my neighbour's property, which they do not hang out in very often, so I didn't think it would be a problem if bees did happen to fly over there. Good to see that the girls are working hard today. You can see they're bringing in lots of pollen, and that's that benefit of having the garden, the public garden, right at the back of our property. Well, that's it for today's video. I really hope that you enjoyed having these little tips brought to you. Again, I really enjoyed bringing them to you because this is something that I really struggled to find when I was first becoming a beekeeper. If you have any more topics you want me to cover, comment below, let me know, and I'll put them in the next video.